Today we're front porchin with Ken Morris. Ken, tell me in just a couple sentences a little bit about yourself.
I am a former pilot in the military. I spent over 10 years flying aircraft. My dad is a bishop in the Church of God organization. My mother spent over 25 years as a radio host and host of a gospel show in Chicago. She's also organized the Gospel Fest in Chicago for over 25 years. I'm married. I'm married to a physician here in the city who works at Richmond Community, and I have a 4-year-old daughter. I also teach at Churchill Academy. I teach biology and chemistry, hopefully on my way to medical school soon, and I think that's about it. And I'm assistant principal at the high school.
Small thing. Yeah.
I always talk to my students about being one of. And when I was in my first squadron, I was one of 55 pilots that was black. Second squadron, I was one of 105. So I grew up actually my first ship, I was one of 28 officers that was black. So I kind of grew up into and chose a profession and a career that was very, that did not look like me. Did not listen to the same music, did not do the same things for downtime. And so I had to assimilate to the larger group to make any advances, rather than them seeing the things that I did as valuable or important. Trying to explain to people, as you go higher and higher in certain levels, there are fewer and fewer faces of minority. Mm-hmm. And that brings the conversation, no matter where you are, to a place that usually embraces the majority's likes and dislikes, mm-hmm. right? So whether or not you like country music, the conversation at a table with 25 officers who are all white is about country music, mm-hmm. right? And then any discussion outside of that is seen as outside of that, mm-hmm. right? And so I've lived in that world, so I'm trying to explain to these kids how to live in both worlds. Because they have a world here that is strictly black, and you understand your blackness in this world. But as soon as they go to Farm Fresh, they realize, oh wow, it's not all black. Or as soon as you go work at Bank of America, or as soon as you go, and the higher you climb up, there are fewer and fewer black faces. Which means the dynamic of what you know to be normal changes as you go up. The norm changes.
As you explain to your students what it's like to be in the minority and how it can impact as you get higher and higher in different areas,
right.
One thing you talked about is how socially it can make you feel disconnected. But I imagine that is only one thing that it can occur in that space. It's one thing to be able to be like, I can't really talk about country music.
Right.
What are some of the other things that come about when you find yourself in that context?
You know, I think there are a myriad of things that happen when you become one of, right? There are little things that happen throughout the day that could not upset the balance, but just make you a little uneasy because someone doesn't realize that they've offended you, mm-hmm. or done something that may have been offensive. So there are things that I experience on a daily basis. When I was a student at VCU, I had just come back from 2 wars. I don't wear any military gear, so you wouldn't know I was in the military. I don't always have a clean-shaven face or clean-shaven head. But here I am, 6'3", 275, black guy, walking through a parking lot, and every single white woman along the way will grab their purse. Every single white woman along the way will get to the elevator, turn around, look at me, and wait to see if I'm going for the elevator or the stairs. And I make a conscious decision to make them more comfortable. And so it's consciously on my mind as I'm walking to class, don't make them uncomfortable. Because something will either happen. Either they will go to mace, or they'll go to police, or they'll go to whistle. But they won't go to rational, which is, this is just a guy with a book bag on his way to biology, right? Even when you're on an elevator. You get on an elevator and there's you and it's a white female, you can tell she's pensive. She's standing there waiting for, and I usually, very, very specific about using Queen's English. How are you? How are things? And they hear that, they hear the dictation, they hear the enunciation, and go, oh, okay, he's okay. Mm-hmm. And that in of itself is a life you have to live outside of Churchill. It happens in Churchill on a smaller range. Maybe when you drive up to a light, and I'm in a 2007 M35, mm-hmm. right? It's not like it's a very cheap vehicle, mm-hmm. but I'll still have somebody in a very, very inexpensive vehicle next to me lock their doors as soon as I drive up. Or they'll shoot me a look and just go, you can tell they're just uneasy, and they'll look and they'll look down. And I just don't know why it's just not, oh, there's an individual in the car. It's, is he going to do something? Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is, I attribute a lot of that to television and radio and movies. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get too much into the Hollywood versus the media, right. But there seems to be a bias towards when you hear an individual has committed a crime. Usually, if that individual is black, they'll tell you the race. Mm-hmm. If the individual is not, they probably won't. If the individual committed the crime and it was a crime of, let's say, shooting 9 people in a church, it was a lone gunman. But if it was a black person shooting 9 people, it was a terrorist. Mm-hmm. And that changes the mindset. It makes people feel a little more apprehensive when they see a darker face. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that face is the face of a millionaire, or is the principal, or a pilot, or somebody who's went to 3 wars, or a store owner. They see something that says, I am in danger and I should fear, which generates this other impulse that they have to do something about it. What's my corrective action? Vice, that's just another human being.
It's not lost on me that I'm a white male. And
good.
Having a number of friends who are also white and also male, I hear a lot of responses to a lot of the things you just said. Sometimes the response I hear is, well, those things don't really happen. Mm-hmm. But you've just shared a number of experiences, and I know me personally, I went to a panel a year ago, and there's a local news anchor who is black who mm-hmm. shared about being pulled over, and there's a local comedian who shared about things that he experienced. So it is happening. Yes. Now, the next question that I would hear friends of mine who are white and male say would be, well, I mean, that's not something I would do because I'm not racist.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Well, I think you might not be racist, but you have actions that tend toward racism. Mm-hmm. You might not be racist, but you have actions that tend toward you being of a superior or separate class. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's class warfare, maybe it's a social warfare, maybe it's spiritual warfare. But I know that it exists on a level that we feel every day. Mm-hmm. I was having a conversation with my staff at Churchill Academy just today about just feeling different things and whether or not someone felt like they were being racist or not. And we were discussing the presidential nominations and the presidential races, and it seemed as if the whites in the room did not recognize that there was an inherent benefit in their skin tone, whereas the blacks realized an absolute deficiency that exists just because of their skin tone, that had nothing to do with their education level, their background, their maturity, their income level, and it seemed like there was a gap. And that gap manifests itself in a way that's palpable to most blacks. I mean, I'll give you an example. So I was followed in that car I described to Walmart on a Saturday morning by a cop who drove, I passed him doing the speed limit, 35 and a 35, and he drove 4.2 miles. I tracked him the whole way, right behind me, not even a full car and a half length, 4.5 miles to Walmart, circled my car and drove off. This is not even 2 months ago. And I was in a sweatsuit, I had a hoodie on, so maybe that was my crime, but I didn't speed, I used my turn signals, my plates are good, so maybe he found no reason to stop me, but it still gave you a sense of, you're not welcome here. These are $500,000 homes. You really shouldn't be here. You're making other people uncomfortable by your presence. And it's things we think about. I passed a park on the way going to Walmart, and I thought, man, I want to go run on Saturday morning. But the first thing I thought is, I shouldn't run at that park because I don't ever see black people running there. And the first thing I think is that backwoods area is, will there be a confrontation? Will someone get scared that I'm running? Because I work out in all black, and I have my headphones on, and I'm not, when I'm in my world, I'm in my world. But I am 6'3", 275. Yeah. So I automatically have this aggressive stance, whether or not I'm aggressive. I actually was stopped by a cop in San Diego about 9 years ago when I was driving just through the city. And I was driving downtown to show a friend the wonderful spots they can go downtown. And I had a cop stop me, pull me over, and said, "You had an aggressive look on your face." And I said, I apologize, I don't know what aggressive looks like. And he said, "Are you being smart with me?" And I said, "No, I'm not. I don't know what aggressive looks like, and I apologize if I offended you." And he said, "I need you to stop talking and stop being smart." And that's, to me, educated, master's degree, 3 wars. I can only imagine what happens to other individuals who don't have the knowledge or the education to actually to make sure that they put themselves in a situation where it doesn't exacerbate the situation. I knew he was looking for a reason to arrest me. He was looking for a reason to embarrass me because it was downtown on a Friday night. Hey, let's arrest this guy. For what? I wasn't doing anything. I don't know if that answers the question, but the point is, those are things they don't experience on a daily basis. You can walk to VCU and not worry about your bag, or if you're on an elevator with a white woman, or when you pull up to a light, whether or not you're going to be, or when you walk up to a door, like this door right here. You walk up a door and knock on it. Does the person know you? If they do know you, the other people in the house know you. And if they don't, well, they call the police on you. That's happened also, because they didn't know I was coming to the party. And so it puts a bit of tension and stress in your body constantly. There's this layer of stress you always feel, and you have to fight it off with a little bit of rationale and a little bit of I don't care, right? There has to be a little bit of I'm not going to let that affect me today. But that's the only way you get over it, is to tell yourself you have to get over it, because there is no that place always exists no matter where you go. If I'm at Macy's being followed, or if I'm walking through the mall, or like yesterday sitting at a restaurant with my daughter, and the police stop in front of the window, just look in, and I looked around like, is something going on inside the restaurant?
Yeah.
And there wasn't. It was just he had not probably seen a black face sitting with his daughter. It's just, and maybe it's the amount of situations that need to happen to allow the majority to feel more comfortable with the affluence of the minority. Because we are in most places now. We can go to Barbados and Fiji and eat in the more expensive restaurants. And our absence from those places was okay. Our inclusion in those places has become an issue.
This is why conversations are so important, because it can be easy to kind of just sit in your own understanding of how life works,
right,
and not be aware that it can work in very different ways in the experience. I know for me, how you doing today? I know you're fine.
Right. Mail's got to get delivered.
Yeah, you got to do what you got to do. I know for me, one of the first times being confronted by this topic and having to actually stop and say, maybe I don't fully understand what's happening, was 10 years ago. I was an intern in an organization a lot like Chat, Urban Promise, and I was with the executive director, and we were meeting over lunch with somebody and having a great conversation about what we do and what it looks like. And I remember, and I'll never forget, the guy asks, so, in your engagement with the teens, like, is race still an issue? In my mind, it immediately starts thinking about all the great interactions I've had with the teens and how much fun we have and how well we get along. He's like, I'm like, actually, it seems like things are fine. We're getting along well. And I start going on this train, and Rob Prestwick's executive director stops me and says, yes, it is absolutely still an issue. And he starts explaining real stories about teens that he knows that experience things like you just shared, walking into a department store and immediately being watched or being confronted or being asked to leave. And
having to go into a restaurant and having to pay first. Vice having to pay like everyone else pays after the meal. That's a common problem with African American youth. We have that happen.
Yeah. And it's striking to me because for me, I can walk into a restaurant or walk into a department store, and the only thing on my mind is what I came there to do, to get the thing or to get the food. What you just shared is when you go to a place, on top of that, you have to be mindful of how am I talking, how am I dressed, how am I walking. That has to be exhausting.
It is. And you actually don't think of the food first. You think of how you're being perceived before you think of what you're eating. Because if you don't think of how you're being perceived, the older African American people, black people, know that they will encounter a situation that they don't want to encounter. So we're quite aware of it in a large group, in a small group, me and my daughter, me and my wife and my daughter, if I'm in a hoodie and sweatpants. So if I go and work out with my daughter, I think about, man, if she wants to go eat after this, I really don't want to be in a sweatshirt and sweatpants when I go eat. I think about that. I need to go home and take a shower, which means I can't do this, this, and this because I have to be focused on making sure my presence is amenable to the rest of the crowd. It's absolutely exhausting. There is a point at which I think we all who experience it and recognize we experience it, you definitely get to a point where you say enough is enough, and you decide to try to change it at some level. But that is difficult, to change an entire mindset that is constantly being driven in a certain direction. You can adjust the content of the television sets or the movie screens of all of the white people that are saying, wow, the first black character in that movie choked that white woman. What does that have to do with me? Nothing. But they relate those things because they're relatable. And I can relate that to the very large black man I see in front of me standing in the counter at Macy's. It is exhausting because you think about things like, I don't put my hands in my pocket ever when I'm in a store. I don't reach in if my lips are chapped when I go in a store, I don't put chapstick on. Guess what? My lips will just be chapped. You think about those things. And the newer generation, maybe not so much. I think they are, they didn't grow up with the more overt signs of racism in the 70s and 80s. And the 90s and 2000s have become a little more subtle. You might, not call the quarterback, fast. You might call him athletic. That way, And in that sense, there are some key words that we're fighting with. People are often fighting with words like at risk and urban, and those words tend to lead toward one way or another. And it does make you feel a certain way. And it's definitely something you have to continually check yourself on. And I talk to my students a lot about black females and childbirth, and that one of the big leading factors of black females in childbirth having issues birthing babies naturally and normally is stress. And that stress is often caused by racism. There are other issues in there, malnutrition, there's issues of not exercising, there's issues of being a young mother. But stress is a constant thing that constantly releases things in your bloodstream that force you to store fat, or they force you to not release energy stores. And so is it having a physiological effect on us? Absolutely, on a daily basis. And I think a lot of African Americans fight with weight problems, not because they're not in the gym, but because they're fighting with this other war that's well beyond exercise. It's a mental war that goes on daily, and if you don't fight it, the family doesn't eat. And so you have to figure out how to fight it and maintain your sanity.
So for those that would hear the word racism and start to shut down or get scared, what we're doing is we're pulling back and saying what's happening is there are people who are being engaged with, judged, interacted with in a different way because of the way they look, whether they're black, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're Asian. And those things are impacting what they're able to do, how they're able to engage everyday life, the level of stress. So let me ask this question, and you talked a little bit about how you communicate with the youth and how in some ways they might not be saying things as overtly, but there's still subtle things happening. So if left unchecked, if things continued as they are, how is that going to impact them as they become adults?
On a macro level, you'll see diseases that present themselves as things that could be attributable to their diet or their neighborhood or their environment that are directly attributable to the level of stress they feel on a daily basis walking into establishment and feeling unwelcome, or having to pay before they even order their food, or being followed in a store because they have on a white t-shirt and with no words on it. Maybe they have headphones in their ears. On a micro level, I think individually it takes a toll on what that child may be it may feel like they can do in their future. They may say, I don't want to be a forensic psychologist because I don't know any black forensic psychologists. I don't want to be a radio disc jockey because I don't know any black radio disc jockeys. Or I just don't feel like that's for me. And that may be a subtle way of them saying, I didn't feel welcome there. I don't think that career is something that I can do. So I think it definitely, it can lead our kids to certain professions and steer them away from others. Because one, if you don't see faces that look like you doing the thing you want to do, you tend to be led away just naturally. I think a second thing is that when you're trying to figure out what you want to do, just as a kid, you tend to look for people that excite you and that motivate you. So you want to go toward entertainment, and those things don't necessarily last. They don't allow for the sustainment of your family unless you go out of basketball and become a TV producer. If you want to go become a professor at a school, it is those things. Again, have to come intrinsically. You have to, we have to, what we're doing at the Academy, introduce those people into their lives that look like them or that understand their plight and can also say, but this direction you can go in. I get what's happening, but if you go in this direction, yeah, you'll experience this, but I think this is for you. Instead of them saying, I give an example. We went to the Federal Reserve over the summer. We took 15 kids to the Federal Reserve. I think when they went into that building, again, they saw no faces of color. When we went to the next building next door, it was a financial office. And the first person they saw was a receptionist. So they immediately thought, oh, I could be a receptionist. But anything above that, there were no faces of color on the entire floor. And so I think they were automatically turned off from the idea of anything financial because that world doesn't, I don't belong in that world, and that world doesn't belong to me. I don't know how they, on a daily basis, see the interactions between those people affecting their career journey, but I think that they wouldn't want to do something they don't see themselves or someone that looks like them do.
What are some things that I can do to address this, to make an impact, to at least have an awareness?
I think there's so many things you can do. I think one thing you can do is be aware of things like this, the medium that allows you the porthole into someone else's experience. That's extremely important because you could never ever walk you could never walk a mile in my footsteps. You can't drive my car and experience what happened to me driving up. I had a cop as I was driving from the school follow me from the school to here as I drove here. Now, I don't know if he was just happened to be on that route and going to Oakwood, but when I parked here, he kept going. Having to experience that every day and knowing that, you can never feel that. But then watching this allows you, again, the experience. Going to a place, number two, going to a place that has a race or sex or creed or outside of your norm is important because that opens you up to the fact that the world is 7 billion people and not your neighborhood, right? I think you need to expand those experiences to where you're with people of an ethnicity that is not the norm for you. That immediately allows you to go into a place where you were not welcome before, or not welcome, but a place where you were not, that was not available to you before. And you have an understanding that could not come of your own, right? You could not read this in a book and say, I get that. But as soon as you sit down in a class of 25 black kids and they start drumming, you feel it. You're like, I get this. Like I did at Friday Mix. I get this. I understand it from that experience. A third thing that people like yourself could do is engage the topic in a way that's constructive. we all have experiences where we've had a friend that says, "Oh, I had a friend tell a joke and it was really off color. Well, did you say anything about it?" And they say, "No, I didn't want to make him feel bad." But that was a chance to maybe address a difference of opinion or a situation that might affect that individual down the road. He might not, or she might not, tell that joke to someone else and then offend them because of your interaction. So I say intervene. Find that way that you can get involved, and not that you have to sit at the table and listen for it. You're waiting for a race joke to happen. That's no way to live.
Yeah.
But when you do hear things that don't somehow allow reality to come through, right? That door is only colored on one side, and that color is white, or that color is whatever, and then you don't realize that there's colors on the other side of that. I think that's that person's job who's there and can address it, to open that door and say, "That's who else you just offended." So I think those are three tangible ways that people could be involved.
And it sounds like a core of those is relationship. That it's not just me coming to you and saying, "Hey, tell me what it's like to be black so that I can have the information."
Yeah.
It's relationship. It's a longer term thing. This isn't a short term fix, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a longer term thing. Would you agree?
I do. I think that just to say, I have 7 white friends doesn't say anything about my relationship with the majority of Americans. It doesn't. And it doesn't speak to the fact that I understand things about your race that I wouldn't if I didn't have 7 friends. Me saying that kind of gives itself to this credence that I know everything about white culture or Caucasian Americans because I know 7 of you. And that's not the truth either. So I think you have to be careful when you quantify a relationship rather than just experiencing it. Instead of saying, "I got a black friend," bring the black friend to a party. Instead of just saying, "Oh yeah, I'm at a school with black kids," bring somebody to experience that, and they're more in tune with what is happening because they can live it for themselves.
What are some ways, for those that like to pray, what are some ways that people can pray about this topic?
I think God is multilingual because He invented language. So I don't think there's a specific way that God wants you to pray. I think God wants you to have an open heart and to listen to what is being said back to you. And communication is a two-way street. So you're praying to God, you have to wait and listen for the answer. And it's coming. It might not be what you want to hear, but it might be you need to leave that office that looks just like you and go volunteer at a place that doesn't look like you. So I think the prayer needs to be a prayer of openness and a prayer of sincerity. And I think it needs to be a prayer of inclusion, that you include people that would not normally have the ability to be prayed for or taken care of, but I'm interceding on their behalf.
That's good. Are there any other things that you want to share or that you feel like people should know, or conversations that should be started?
I think there's always conversations of personality and context and color and type. And as we move to a world that is much more globalized, social media has allowed for voices that would never have been heard to be heard. I think people that are listening should be smart about their social media lives and their story, just as they would their normal story, just as they would if I was telling you who I am. My post on Instagram or Facebook or Travelocity says a lot about me and about what I think about certain topics. I think that people need to remain open and realize that that the words they say have an effect, whether they're uttered from their mouth or they're typed on a screen.
Good. It's a very important word. Well, Ken, thank you so much. I appreciate just your time, your story, and more importantly, I appreciate how much you invest in just the youth of this community and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you. I love what I do.
Heaven's revelation said I think it's time to talk about freedom. Think it's it's time to talk about how he took away the pressure. And he told us if we only just believe him, he'll guide us to the truth, and with his spirit he'll direct us.